In 1999, the world was different. Most people did not have a computer in their pocket. Phones were for making calls, and they had small black and green screens. But Michel Guillemot saw something else. He was one of the brothers who started the famous game company Ubisoft. He believed that mobile phones would become powerful entertainment devices. This was a bold idea. At the time, playing a game on a phone meant something simple, like Snake. Guillemot envisioned much more. He wanted to bring rich, complex gaming experiences to these small screens, transforming them into handheld consoles for everyone. His vision led to the creation of Gameloft. The company started in Paris, France. Its mission was clear and ambitious. It would make high-quality video games for mobile phones. This was a market that almost nobody else was taking seriously. Big game companies were focused on PlayStation and Xbox. PC gaming was also huge. But Gameloft put all its energy into the tiny screens of Java-enabled feature phones. They were pioneers, betting on a future that many in the industry could not yet see. They believed that people would want to play more than just simple puzzle games while waiting for the bus. Gameloft's early success was staggering. They understood the technology of these early phones better than anyone. They knew how to push the limits of weak processors and small memory. They created games that looked and felt like they belonged on a Game Boy Advance, not a Nokia phone. They released titles like Prince of Persia: Harem Adventures and Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. These games were not just simple diversions, they were full-fledged adventures with stories, levels, and detailed graphics. For millions of people, Gameloft was their first introduction to gaming on a mobile device. The company grew incredibly fast. They opened studios all over the world, from Montreal to Bucharest. This global network allowed them to produce a large number of games very quickly. By the mid-2000s, Gameloft was the undisputed king of mobile gaming. When you bought a new flip phone, it often came with a Gameloft game pre-installed. They had deals with every major phone carrier like Verizon and AT&T. If you wanted to download a game to your phone, you probably went through a carrier's digital store, and Gameloft's titles were always at the top. They had built an empire before the first iPhone even existed. Gameloft's strategy was straightforward but effective. They aimed to deliver console-quality experiences on mobile phones. This meant taking popular game genres from PlayStation and Xbox and adapting them for a smaller screen. If a big racing game was a hit on consoles, Gameloft would create its own version called Asphalt. If a military shooter like Call of Duty was popular, Gameloft would make Brothers in Arms. This approach gave mobile users a taste of the big-budget games their friends were playing on dedicated gaming machines. It was a smart way to meet a clear demand. Another key part of their plan was using big recognizable licenses. Gameloft worked with major entertainment companies to bring famous characters and worlds to mobile. They made games based on movies like Spider-Man and Iron Man. They also secured the rights to popular video game franchises from their sister company, Ubisoft, such as Assassin's Creed and Rayman. These big names helped their games stand out. When people saw a character they already knew and loved, they were more likely to pay the $5 or $10 to download the game. This strategy reduced marketing risk and guaranteed a certain level of interest. The company was also a machine when it came to releasing games. Their many studios around the world were constantly working. Gameloft was known for its relentless production schedule. They would release dozens of new titles every single year. This constant stream of content kept their name in front of consumers. It also meant they could experiment with different types of games. If one game didn't sell well, there were 10 more coming right behind it. This high volume of releases ensured that Gameloft dominated the digital storefronts of mobile carriers, leaving little room for smaller competitors. This formula worked perfectly for the pre-smartphone era. In those days, a mobile game was a product you bought once. You paid a fixed price, downloaded the game, and owned it forever. Gameloft mastered this model. They knew exactly how to price their games to be attractive to mobile users. They built a powerful distribution network through partnerships with phone manufacturers and carriers. They were a well-oiled machine, expert at creating, marketing, and selling premium mobile games. For a long time, it seemed like their reign would never end. Their business was built for this specific world. In 2008, everything changed. Apple launched the App Store for its new iPhone. This was a major disruption to the mobile world. Suddenly, any developer, big or small, could create a game and sell it directly to millions of iPhone owners. They no longer needed to make complicated deals with dozens of different phone carriers. The App Store was a single global marketplace. It was easier for developers to publish games and easier for users to find and buy them. This new platform created an explosion of creativity and competition. The old gatekeepers were gone. Initially, Gameloft seemed perfectly positioned to thrive. They were one of the first major publishers to support the iPhone. They brought their popular franchises like Asphalt and Nova to the new device. These games looked incredible on the iPhone's large, colorful screen. They used the touch controls and accelerometer in clever ways. Games like Nova, which looked a lot like Halo, showed what was possible on the platform. For a short time, Gameloft was a dominant force on the App Store, charging premium prices of $6.99 or even $9.99 for their high-quality titles. But the App Store also introduced a new business model, free-to-play. Games like Tap Tap Revenge and later Angry Birds showed that you could make a lot of money without charging for the game itself. Some games were free but supported by ads. Others were free to download but sold small items inside the game, a model called microtransactions. This was a radical shift. Why would someone pay $7 for a Gameloft game when they could get hundreds of other fun games for free? The value proposition of a premium mobile game started to weaken. This new model, often called freemium, quickly became the standard on the App Store and later on Google's Android Play Store. Companies like Supercell and King built entire empires on free-to-play games like Clash of Clans and Candy Crush Saga. These games were designed from the ground up to be services, not just products. They were meant to be played for months or even years, with a constant stream of updates and events to keep players engaged and spending money. Gameloft, a company built on selling games as a one-time purchase, was now facing a completely different market. The ground was shifting beneath their feet. Gameloft was a big company with a well-established way of doing things. Changing direction was like trying to turn a giant cargo ship. Their entire production pipeline was designed to create premium, single-purchase games. They had teams of designers, artists, and programmers who were experts at making games with a clear beginning, middle, and end. The shift to free-to-play required a completely different mindset. It wasn't just about making a fun game anymore. It was about designing an economy, managing a live service, and analyzing player data. The company's initial attempts to adapt were clumsy. They started by taking their existing premium games and trying to add free-to-play elements. For example, they might release a game for free, but then put up aggressive paywalls that made it very difficult to progress without spending money. This often frustrated players. They felt like the company was trying to trick them into paying. These early free-to-play games from Gameloft got a reputation for being pay-to-win, where the players who spent the most money had an unfair advantage. It was a difficult transition, and they made many mistakes along the way. Internally, there was resistance to the new model. Many developers at Gameloft had joined the company because they wanted to make console-style games. They were passionate about crafting compelling stories and balanced gameplay. The new focus on monetization and player retention felt cynical to some. It seemed to prioritize business metrics over creative vision. This created tension within the studios. The culture that had made Gameloft so successful in the past was now holding it back from adapting to the new reality of the mobile market. Meanwhile, their old business model was collapsing. Sales of premium games on mobile plummeted across the industry. It became nearly impossible to convince a large number of players to pay for a game upfront when so many high-quality free alternatives were available. Gameloft was caught between two worlds. Their old way of making money was disappearing, but they hadn't yet figured out how to succeed with the new way. Their revenues began to stagnate, and the company that had once been the undisputed leader in mobile gaming started to look vulnerable. The App Store and Google Play didn't just change the business model, they also opened the floodgates to new competition. In the old days, Gameloft's main rivals were a few other specialized mobile publishers. But now, anyone could be a competitor. A small team of 2 or 3 people could create a hit game like Flappy Bird and reach millions of players overnight. The barriers to entry had been completely removed. Gameloft was no longer competing with a handful of companies, they were competing with thousands of them. This new wave of developers was nimble and innovative. Companies like Supercell, King and Rovio were built from the ground up for the free-to-play world. They understood how to design games as a service. They were experts in data analysis, learning exactly what kept players coming back day after day. Their games, like Clash of Clans and Candy Crush Saga, were not just fun to play, they were masterclasses in player engagement and monetization. Gameloft, with its large, slow-moving corporate structure, struggled to keep up with the pace of innovation set by these new focused competitors. At the same time, the cost of making a successful mobile game began to skyrocket. In the early days of the App Store, a simple game could become a hit, but as the market matured, players' expectations grew. They wanted games with high-quality 3D graphics, complex systems, and constant updates. Furthermore, with millions of apps on the store, just getting your game noticed became a huge challenge. Companies started spending massive amounts of money on marketing and user acquisition. It was no longer enough to just make a good game. You had to spend millions to make sure people found it. This created a difficult situation for Gameloft. Their development costs were rising, but their revenue from premium games was falling. They were forced to invest heavily in marketing for their new free-to-play titles just to compete. This squeezed their profit margins. The mobile gaming market had become a red ocean, a crowded and fiercely competitive space where only the strongest could survive. Gameloft was a big fish, but the pond had suddenly become an ocean filled with sharks. They were fighting for survival in a market they had once completely owned. As Gameloft struggled to find its footing, it faced another growing criticism. For years, the company had been known for making games that were, heavily inspired by popular console and PC titles. Their Nova series looked and played a lot like Halo. Their Gangstar series was a clear take on Grand Theft Auto, and Modern Combat was their version of Call of Duty. In the early days, players were just happy to have these types of experiences on their phones. But as the mobile market matured, this strategy began to hurt their reputation. Critics and players started calling them a clone factory. The term was harsh, but it reflected a growing sentiment. While their games were often technically impressive, they were rarely original. This became a bigger problem in the App Store era. When the original developers of a hit PC game like League of Legends decided to make a mobile version, Gameloft's similar-looking game, Heroes of Order and Chaos, seemed less special. They were no longer just competing with console games, they were competing with mobile versions of the very games they were imitating. This strategy also came with high costs. While they weren't always original, Gameloft did invest heavily in production value. Their games had detailed graphics, voice acting, and complex gameplay. These were expensive to make. Their other major strategy, licensing big movie and comic book properties, was also incredibly costly. Paying for the rights to use a name like Spider-Man or The Dark Knight required a massive upfront investment. When these games were premium, they could recoup that cost through sales. But in the free-to-play market, it was much harder to guarantee a return on such a large investment. The combination of high development costs, expensive licenses, and a reputation for a lack of originality put Gameloft in a tight spot. They were spending a lot of money to make games that were often seen as copies of more popular titles. This made it difficult to build strong, loyal communities around their own original brands. While franchises like Asphalt were very successful, many of their other games struggled to stand out in the crowded marketplace. The formula that had once been a guarantee of success was now showing, some serious cracks. By the mid-2010s, Gameloft was in financial trouble. The company that had once posted impressive profits was now struggling. Their transition to free-to-play was not going as smoothly as hoped, and the high costs of development and marketing were eating into their revenue. The company's stock price fell, making it a target. This weakness attracted the attention of a much larger French media conglomerate, Vivendi. Vivendi had a long history in the video game industry, having once owned Blizzard Entertainment. Now, they wanted to get back into the business. Vivendi saw an opportunity. They began quietly buying up shares of both Gameloft and its sister company, Ubisoft, which were both run by the Guillemot brothers. Their plan was to take control of both companies. The Guillemot family, who had founded and run these companies for decades, saw this as a hostile attack. They fought back fiercely, trying to convince other shareholders not to sell to Vivendi. They argued that Vivendi's corporate culture would destroy the creative spirit that had made Gameloft and Ubisoft successful. It was a dramatic and public battle for the future of the company. The fight for Gameloft came to a head in 2016. Despite the Guillemot family's best efforts, Vivendi managed to acquire a controlling stake in the company. They successfully completed a hostile takeover. Michel Guillemot, the founder and CEO who had guided Gameloft from its inception, resigned in protest. He had lost the company he had built from scratch. It was a bitter end to his long tenure. The employees at Gameloft were left in a state of uncertainty, worried about what the new owners would do. For Vivendi, acquiring Gameloft was the first step in a larger strategy. They wanted to create a European media giant that combined video games, television, and music. They saw Gameloft as a key piece of this puzzle, a way to reach a huge global audience of mobile users. However, the takeover came at a high cost, not just financially, but in terms of morale and stability. The company that had once been a family-run pioneer of mobile gaming was now just one small part of a massive, faceless corporation. The culture of Gameloft was about to change forever. The aftermath of the Vivendi takeover was swift and honestly, pretty brutal. The new management team had its own vision for the company, and it did not align with the old way of doing things. One of their first major actions was to restructure the company to cut costs and improve profitability. This meant looking closely at Gameloft's sprawling global network of development studios. For years, Gameloft's strength had been its many studios, which allowed it to produce a high volume of games. But under the new ownership, this network was seen as inefficient and expensive. What followed was a painful series of studio closures and layoffs. In the months and years after the takeover, Gameloft shut down numerous studios around the world. Offices in New York City, Seattle, Tokyo, and other cities were closed. Hundreds of talented and experienced developers lost their jobs. These were people who had poured years of their lives into making Gameloft's games. The closures sent a shockwave through the remaining staff, creating a climate of fear and instability. The company's capacity to produce a large number of diverse games was significantly reduced. The culture of the company also changed dramatically. Under the Guillemot brothers, Gameloft had a reputation for being a demanding place to work, but it was also a place driven by a passion for making games. The new corporate ownership brought a much stronger focus on financial metrics and synergy with other Vivendi properties. The creative freedom that developers once had was curtailed. Decisions were increasingly made based on market data and profit projections rather than on a creative spark. Many veteran employees who were unhappy with the new direction chose to leave the company. This period marked the definitive end of the old Gameloft. The company that had pioneered mobile gaming and dominated the market for a decade was gone. In its place was a streamlined, downsized organization that was part of a larger media conglomerate. The focus shifted from ambitious, console-style experiences to safer, more predictable free-to-play games that could generate reliable revenue. The spirit of innovation and risk-taking that had defined Gameloft's early years was largely extinguished, replaced by a more cautious and corporate approach. Today, in 2025, Gameloft still exists. The company continues to develop and publish mobile games, and its name can still be found on the App Store and Google Play. However, it is a very different company from the titan it once was. Its role in the industry has been significantly diminished. They are no longer the leaders or the innovators. Instead, they operate as a solid mid-tier publisher, focused on maintaining their existing franchises and developing new games within the established free-to-play model. They are a player in the market, but no longer the one that defines it. The company's primary focus is now on games as a service. Their most successful titles are long-running franchises like Asphalt and Disney Magic Kingdoms. These games are supported for years with a constant stream of new content, events, and updates. This is the model that has proven to be the most profitable in the modern mobile market, and Gameloft has become proficient at it. They have learned the lessons from their difficult transition and are now a capable operator of live service games. However, they rarely venture into creating bold new intellectual properties or experimenting with risky game concepts. The strategy of cloning or creating inspired by titles has also faded. The market is now too competitive for that approach to work as well as it once did. Instead, Gameloft relies heavily on its two main pillars: its own established brands like Asphalt and Modern Combat, and major licensed properties, particularly from Disney. Games like Disney Dreamlight Valley, which also came to PC and consoles, show that the company can still produce high-quality popular experiences, but they are often tied to existing powerful brands rather than being born from Gameloft's own original ideas. The story of Gameloft is a powerful lesson about the importance of adaptation. They were masters of a specific era in gaming. They understood the technology, the market, and the business model of the feature phone world better than anyone. But when the world changed with the arrival of the App Store and free-to-play, they were too slow to adapt. Their past success became a liability, making it difficult to change their culture and strategy. Gameloft's journey from a dominant industry leader to a subsidiary of a larger corporation is a cautionary tale that echoes throughout the fast-moving world of technology. It shows that no matter how successful you are, you must always be ready for what comes next.